She was a mother. A daughter. A woman who built a life from the ground up. 37 years old, with 2 beautiful children who adored her and a successful business that carried her name. Sophia Carter had spent years creating a future, one that promised happiness, stability, and the kind of love she had always dreamed of. On the morning of November 12, 2023, she woke up in her home in Atlanta, Georgia, unaware that it would be her last day alive. Unaware that every moment, every step, every word spoken within those walls was leading her toward a fate she could never have imagined. That night, as the world carried on outside, as city lights flickered in the distance and families gathered in their homes, a nightmare was unfolding in the presence of the one person who had protected her since birth, her mother. A single phone call shattered the silence. A woman's voice, trembling, desperate, fighting against the weight of what she had just witnessed. "Please, hurry. My daughter is dying." The words, barely audible through the sobs, carried the kind of horror that freezes time. When officers arrived, they found a scene that would haunt even the most seasoned investigators. The air was heavy, thick with something unspoken. Sophia lay motionless, her body bearing the marks of a struggle that should have never happened. And standing just feet away, hands trembling, eyes empty, was the man she had once trusted with her life. Her husband. How does a marriage end in bloodshed? What pushes a man to destroy the very person he vowed to love and protect? Was this a crime of passion, or had the signs been there all along, buried beneath years of control, jealousy, and resentment? Tonight, we are going to walk through every moment leading up to Sophia Carter's final breath. The whispers of warning. The unspoken fears. The choices that sealed her fate. Because this was not a random act of violence. It was something else entirely. Stay with us. The truth is about to unfold. Atlanta, Georgia. A city that never truly sleeps. A place where dreams are built, fortunes are made, and, sometimes, lives are lost in ways too tragic to comprehend. On November 12, 2023, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, the Carter family home stood in eerie stillness. Within its walls, a story of love and betrayal was reaching its breaking point. Sophia Carter was the kind of woman people admired. Strong. Intelligent. Driven. At 37, she had built a thriving event planning business from the ground up, turning her passion into a career that allowed her to provide for her 2 children, 11-year-old Mason and 8-year-old Ava. To the outside world, she was a success story, a woman who had it all. A loving family. A flourishing career. A life others envied. But in the private corners of her world, behind the carefully curated images of happiness, cracks had begun to form. And at the center of it all was her husband, Daniel Carter. Daniel had once been her biggest supporter. A man who had promised her the world. Handsome, charming, the kind of husband who knew exactly what to say, exactly when to say it. They had met in their early 20s, 2 ambitious souls navigating life together. In the beginning, there was passion, laughter, a bond that felt unbreakable. They built a life side by side, raising their children in a home filled with warmth. But over time, that warmth began to fade. Jealousy crept in. Subtle at first, questions about who she was texting, comments about the time she spent at work. Then, the possessiveness grew. Accusations. Unwarranted suspicions. A love that once lifted her up began to weigh her down, suffocating under the pressure of Daniel's growing insecurity. Sophia confided in those closest to her. Her mother, Evelyn Monroe, had been the first to notice the shift. She had seen the way her daughter's smile no longer reached her eyes, how her voice carried a tension that hadn't been there before. And then there were the bruises, small, easily explained away. "I tripped," Sophia would say. "Just clumsy." But Evelyn knew better. A mother always knows. That evening, Evelyn was at the Carter home, visiting as she often did. The house was quiet, the children asleep upstairs. In the kitchen, Sophia was cleaning up after dinner, her hands moving mechanically, lost in thought. Daniel sat in the living room, scrolling through his phone, his jaw tight, his silence louder than any argument. A single text message changed everything. Sophia's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, and in that split second, Daniel's world unraveled. He stood abruptly, his eyes locked onto the screen, his face twisting into something unrecognizable. "Who is that?" His voice was sharp, demanding. Sophia hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. He lunged for the phone, grabbing it before she could react. A name flashed across the screen, Michael Reynolds. A longtime client. Nothing more. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing that warranted the fury now radiating from Daniel's eyes. Evelyn watched from across the room, her heart pounding. She had seen this look before. She had heard the venom in his voice, the barely contained rage simmering beneath his words. "Sophia," she said carefully, stepping forward, her instincts screaming at her to intervene. But it was too late. In the next moment, Daniel's voice rose, accusations spilling out in rapid succession. Sophia stood her ground, refusing to shrink beneath his anger. "This is ridiculous," she said firmly. "You're being paranoid." And then, it happened. In an instant, the room erupted. A chair toppled over. A plate shattered on the tile floor. And in the chaos, Daniel grabbed Sophia's wrist, his grip tightening with a force that sent a clear message: she was his. She had always been his. And if he couldn't have her, no one could. Evelyn screamed, rushing toward them, trying to break his hold. But Daniel was beyond reason, beyond logic. The man who had once vowed to love and protect had now become the thing she feared most. And within moments, the life Sophia had fought so hard to build was slipping away. The moment Daniel's fingers tightened around Sophia's wrist, time seemed to slow. The fear in her eyes was undeniable, her mother's frantic voice barely breaking through the suffocating tension in the room. Evelyn rushed forward, her hands grasping at Daniel's arm, trying to pry him away. "Let her go, Daniel," she pleaded, her voice shaking. "This isn't you." But the man standing before her was not the man she had known for years. He was someone else entirely. His chest heaved, his face contorted in rage, his grip on Sophia unyielding. A sharp cry of pain echoed through the house. Upstairs, Mason and Ava stirred in their beds, their young minds unaware that their lives were about to change forever. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, Daniel let go. Sophia stumbled back, gasping for breath, her hand clutching the fresh bruise forming on her wrist. Tears welled in her mother's eyes as she reached for her daughter, but Sophia raised a hand, signaling for her to stop. "I'm fine," she whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. Evelyn wanted to scream, to tell her daughter to leave right then and there, to grab her children and never look back. But Sophia had spent years making excuses, justifying Daniel's actions, convincing herself that things would get better. That he would change. She didn't know that change was coming, but not in the way she had hoped. The next day, Sophia went about her routine as if nothing had happened. She dropped the kids off at school, sent emails to her clients, made plans for an upcoming event. To the outside world, she was composed, focused, in control. But inside, something had shifted. She reached for her phone and sent a text. "We need to talk." The message was to Michael Reynolds, the same client whose name had set Daniel off the night before. Michael was more than just a business associate, he was a friend. Someone who had noticed the change in Sophia long before she was willing to admit it herself. Michael responded immediately. "Are you okay?" Sophia hesitated before typing her next words. "No. I think I need help." Meanwhile, Daniel was unraveling. Surveillance footage from a gas station that morning showed him standing at the counter, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his wallet. Witnesses later reported that he seemed agitated, muttering under his breath, barely acknowledging the cashier. His next stop was a hardware store. Security cameras captured him walking through the aisles, picking up a roll of duct tape, a length of rope, a hammer. He paid in cash. What was he planning? That afternoon, Sophia met with Michael at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. She was nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder, her fingers drumming anxiously against the table. Michael leaned in. "Sophia, talk to me. What's going on?" She hesitated before finally exhaling. "It's Daniel," she admitted. "I don't know what to do anymore." Michael's expression darkened. He had suspected for a long time that something was wrong, but hearing it out loud sent a chill down his spine. "Has he hurt you?" Sophia looked down at the bruise on her wrist, then back up at him. "He's getting worse," she said quietly. "I think he's watching me." What neither of them knew was that Daniel was watching. A few tables away, hidden behind a newspaper, he sat listening, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He had followed her. He had seen her reach for Michael's hand. And in that moment, his mind was made up. Sophia Carter had to pay. That night, she returned home, exhausted from the weight of the conversation. She had promised Michael she would consider going to the police, but deep down, she knew how complicated it would be. Daniel was the father of her children. If she left, if she reported him, what would happen to Mason and Ava? She didn't know that her hesitation would cost her everything. At exactly 9:47 p.m., Evelyn Monroe's phone rang. It was Sophia. Her voice was low, trembling. "Mom," she said. "Can you come over?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. By 10:15 p.m., she was at her daughter's doorstep. The house was quiet, too quiet. Sophia stood in the entryway, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes darting nervously toward the staircase. "He's been pacing all night," she whispered. "I don't know what he's thinking." Evelyn felt a familiar dread settle in her chest. "Then let's go. Get the kids and come with me." But before they could move, there was a noise from upstairs. A door creaking open. A slow, deliberate set of footsteps descending the stairs. Daniel appeared at the landing, his eyes hollow, his lips pressed into a thin line. In his hand, he held something small, something that gleamed under the dim hallway light. A knife. Evelyn took a step back, instinctively positioning herself in front of her daughter. "Daniel," she said carefully, her voice firm but gentle. "Put that down." He didn't move. Instead, he took another step forward, his grip tightening around the handle. "I gave you everything," he whispered, his voice eerily calm. "Everything, Sophia." Sophia's breath hitched. "Daniel, please." But he was already moving. The events that followed happened in a blur. A struggle. A scream. The glint of steel flashing in the dim light. The wet, sickening sound of a blade meeting flesh. And then, silence. When the police arrived, Evelyn was still clutching Sophia's lifeless body, her hands stained with the last traces of her daughter's warmth. Daniel stood motionless, the knife slipping from his fingers. His face was expressionless, as if the weight of what he had done hadn't yet sunk in. And somewhere in the house, Mason and Ava slept, unaware that the world they had known was now gone forever. The moment the first officer stepped inside the Carter home, the weight of the crime became suffocating. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, and the only sound was the ragged breathing of Evelyn Monroe as she clutched her daughter's lifeless body. Sophia's eyes were still open, frozen in terror, her mouth slightly parted as if she had tried to speak one final word. But there were no words left, only silence. Daniel stood just feet away, his hands hanging limply at his sides, the knife resting on the floor between them. His face was disturbingly calm. He didn't try to run. He didn't resist as the officers moved toward him, their weapons drawn, their voices commanding. Daniel Carter, step away from the body. Put your hands where we can see them. He didn't respond. He simply raised his hands, as if surrendering was an afterthought, as if the reality of what he had done was only beginning to sink in. When they pulled him away, Evelyn let out a guttural sob, rocking back and forth, her body shaking uncontrollably. An officer crouched beside her, whispering words of comfort, but there was no comfort in that moment. Her daughter was gone. Sophia's children, Mason and Ava, were still upstairs, fast asleep in their beds. An officer was sent to wake them, to gently guide them out of the house before they could see the horror that had unfolded just a few feet away. They would never understand, not fully, not until they were much older, when the weight of the truth would crash down on them like an unstoppable wave. As Daniel was led to the police car, a neighbor, drawn outside by the flashing lights, shouted from across the street. "You monster! She was a good woman." Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't react at all. At the precinct, investigators wasted no time. They took Daniel's blood-stained clothes, his hands still smeared with evidence of his crime. They photographed every inch of him, his blank expression, the bruises on his arms from the struggle, the red mark on his cheek where Evelyn had slapped him in a desperate attempt to stop him. The interrogation room was sterile, cold, the fluorescent light casting harsh shadows over Daniel's face. Detective Mark DeLuca, a seasoned investigator who had seen more than his fair share of domestic homicides, sat across from him. He studied Daniel carefully, noting the way he blinked slowly, the way his fingers tapped idly against the table as if he were waiting for something. "You killed your wife in front of her mother," DeLuca said, his voice low, steady. "Tell me why." Daniel didn't answer right away. He leaned back in his chair, his lips pressing together, his eyes unfocused. "You don't understand," he finally said, his voice devoid of emotion. "She betrayed me." The detective exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Betrayed you? How? Because she wanted to leave? Because she was finally standing up to you?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "She was meeting another man." DeLuca narrowed his eyes. "Michael Reynolds?" Daniel's gaze flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. "We already spoke to him," the detective continued. "He told us about the messages. About the meeting. About how scared Sophia was." Daniel clenched his fists. "She was mine," he muttered. The room fell into an eerie silence. DeLuca leaned forward, his fingers laced together on the table. "You planned this, didn't you? You followed her to that cafe. You saw her talking to Michael, and you decided right then and there that she wasn't going to leave you. That if you couldn't have her, no one could." Daniel's breathing grew heavier. "We have surveillance footage from the gas station, from the hardware store. You bought duct tape, rope, a hammer. What were you planning, Daniel?" Silence. "We also have your texts," DeLuca continued. "You sent her a message just hours before, telling her you wanted to talk things through. That you had a solution." A slow, humorless smile stretched across Daniel's face. "She agreed to talk," he whispered. "She let me in." DeLuca's stomach turned. He had seen men like this before, men who believed they were entitled to the women in their lives, who saw love as possession and control. He leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "She let you in because she thought you wouldn't hurt her. Because she still believed there was something in you worth saving." Daniel's expression flickered, just for a moment. A flash of something almost human. Regret? Guilt? Or was it just anger that his plan had failed? Across town, forensic teams combed through the Carter home. The living room was a crime scene, the blood spatter analysis painting a picture of the brutal attack. A single stab wound to the chest, deep, precise, meant to kill. But there was something else. Detectives searching Daniel's car found a notebook. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic script. "She's trying to leave. I won't let her ruin everything. She's been lying to me for months. If I can't have her, no one will. And at the very bottom, one last chilling sentence. Tonight, she learns what loyalty means. It was premeditated. There was no question. When confronted with the evidence, Daniel didn't protest. He didn't cry. He didn't beg for mercy. He simply leaned back in his chair, exhaled deeply, and said the words that would haunt Sophia's family forever. She should have stayed. The courtroom was silent as the judge entered, the weight of the trial pressing down on everyone in attendance. Evelyn Monroe sat in the front row, her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles were white. Beside her, Sophia's sister, Natalie, wiped away silent tears. The grief was a living thing, thick in the air, impossible to ignore. Daniel Carter, dressed in a gray suit, showed no emotion as he was led to the defendant's table. His face was calm, his eyes empty. He didn't glance at Sophia's family, didn't acknowledge the reporters who had gathered to cover the trial. He simply sat, waiting. The prosecution wasted no time painting a picture of a man consumed by jealousy and control. They laid out the evidence meticulously, the security footage of Daniel purchasing the duct tape and rope, the threatening text messages, the detailed notes found in his car. They called forensic experts to the stand who described the angle of the knife wound, the force used, the precision. It was the act of someone who had planned every step. And then, there was Evelyn. She took the stand, her voice trembling but strong. She spoke of the fear in her daughter's eyes that night, of the way she had begged Daniel to leave. She recounted the horror of watching her daughter take her final breath, of holding Sophia's body as the warmth drained from it. She wanted to live, Evelyn said, her voice breaking. She wanted to be free of him. And he took that away. The defense attempted to argue that Daniel had acted in a moment of passion, that he hadn't planned to kill his wife but had been pushed over the edge when he believed she was leaving him for another man. They called on former colleagues who spoke of his kindness, his dedication to his family. But nothing could erase the cold facts. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. When they returned, the courtroom was tense, the air electric with anticipation. The foreman stood, clearing his throat. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Carter, guilty of first-degree murder." A sharp cry broke from Evelyn's lips. Natalie clutched her mother's hand, sobbing into her shoulder. The weight of justice was both crushing and liberating. Daniel's expression didn't change. Even as the judge's reporters swarmed, eager for a statement from Sophia's family. But Evelyn had no words left. She stood on the steps, staring at the cameras, before whispering, she deserved better. Sophia's children, Mason and Ava, were too young to understand the full extent of what had happened. They were told that their mother had gone to heaven, that she had been taken from them by someone who was supposed to love her. In time, they would learn the truth. In time, they would grapple with the reality of what their father had done. Years passed, and the case remained a painful scar on the community. Domestic violence awareness groups held vigils in Sophia's honor, using her story to shine a light on the dangers of controlling relationships. Evelyn dedicated herself to advocacy, speaking at events, working with women's shelters, doing everything she could to make sure no other mother would have to hold her daughter's lifeless body in her arms. Daniel Carter became just another inmate in a maximum security prison, forgotten by the world outside. There were no visitors, no letters. His name faded from headlines, his story reduced to a cautionary tale. But Sophia's name lived on. Her story was told again and again, not just as a tragedy but as a warning. A reminder that love should never come with fear. That control is not love. That the most dangerous time for a woman in an abusive relationship is the moment she tries to leave. And so, the world moved forward. But for those who loved her, the loss was a wound that would never fully heal. The memory of that night would always linger, a silent echo in the spaces where Sophia should have been. Sophia Monroe's story is one of love, betrayal, and an unimaginable loss that should have never happened. A mother of two, a successful businesswoman, and a daughter who only wanted to break free from a toxic marriage, her life was stolen in a moment of possessive rage. But as we close this case, there are still questions left lingering. Do you believe Daniel Carter's life sentence was enough, or should he have faced the death penalty? Was there any warning sign that could have saved Sophia before it was too late? And most importantly, how can we, as a society, protect women who are trying to escape abusive relationships? I want to hear your thoughts. Share your theories, your opinions, and your feelings about this case in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going because stories like Sophia's deserve to be remembered. If you found this case compelling, make sure to subscribe to The Last Confession for more deep investigative crime stories. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Because every crime has a final truth. And here, we uncover it.